I'm very excited for this podcast today. My guest today is...
Yamadumaram Majigalang, you and Nadi Geoff Anderson, Badu Bupe Yada Wiradjuri. Are you well, friends? My name is Geoff Anderson and I talk a little Wiradjuri.
Fantastic, Geoff. And we're going to talk a lot about Wiradjuri and about how being introduced to Wiradjuri basically saved your life, and how Wiradjuri is being used to bring others into life and to build esteem and help people own culture and go forward in their life. So thank you so much for being a guest today, and really looking forward to having this chat, mate.
No worries.
Just to give people a little bit of idea of what life looks like for Geoff Anderson now, before we sort of wind the clock back and talk about how things were. What's coming up in your week, for instance? What do you got on?
Well, I'll probably, if I'm allowed with this COVID stuff, I'll probably call into about 3 or 4 of the schools and just do a surprise check and see how the language teachers are going. We'll have a meeting on Wednesday and we'll discuss more resources and what we can do and what we can't do. So try and work more into the school curriculum. So let's say if a school class is doing colours, then we'll do a thing on colours that week or that month. So we bring the Wiradjuri language into whatever's happening in school.
Just help people who are watching, listening to this, understand how expansive is Wiradjuri language across New South Wales.
Wiradjuri language goes from Albury in the south to Gilgandra in the north, from Lithgow in the east out to Hillston in the west. So It's a huge, huge area.
That is a huge area.
Yeah.
And it's one of the languages that has been miraculously revived by Stan Grant, who is the father of the journalist Stan Grant, Grant Senior. Together with a friend of mine, Geoff, you might not know John Rudder, but John Rudder worked with Stan Grant.
I John well.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
fantastic.
we lost him about a month ago.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a very good man. And what's happened with the Wiradjuri language is an incredible story. And if people aren't familiar with it, today's just going to give you a little bit of an insight on that. So you're very busy in rolling out this language, and it's been going some years now in your area. And I gather what you're doing has become a model for other areas of New South Wales as well. Is that right?
Yeah, about 2006, it was just everything coincidental because I was in a really bad spot myself, mentally, physically. I had a boss that was an absolute horror and drove me mentally into the ground with the back injury that I had. That started a bad case of agoraphobia.
Yep.
And for about 4 years, I just basically lived inside, having panic attacks. I couldn't do anything at all. I was a shell of a person. Then a Gamilaroi woman by the name of Virginia, she was a friend of ours, and she said, "You might not want to go, but do you want to go over to Stan Grant?" I went, "Yeah, come on, let's go. Let's go and do it." And people were saying, "Wow, we won't leave the house for anything else." But then I was able to get over there because I don't know why, it was just the energy or something that was just so strong to go and see Stan Grant Senior and start learning and John Rudder and start learning. And Stan taught me a song, and that became like my mantra to be able to get out of the house, and that was Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree.
Okay, well, I'm going to get you to sing it to us right now. Away you go.
Kookaburra whip beyond the mud and da get a boka bit of my queen gindana Kookaburra gindana Kookaburra get a molan balano.
That's wonderful, Geoff. And that became your personal mantra, your song of healing, if you like, from total housebound. I gather these were panic attacks, and they were a result of the trauma of the injury. Is that the relationship between the the agoraphobia. Yeah.
I had a complete mental and physical breakdown.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was just worthless, until I got Stan Grant Senior taught me that song. From there, I managed. I had my old black dog, and I used to walk around the street, and I'd be able to sing that song, and it was just get me through things. I discovered I could get out of the mailbox. Then I could go to the corner. Then I could go around the corner. It just didn't happen overnight, but it happened.
Yes.
It took a long time to be able to then walk around to the Parks East School and go into the class, and that's sort of where everything sort of happened. And
well, we're going to talk about that. This agoraphobia, did it last, like, we're talking 6 months, a year?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years. It was horrible. Absolutely horrible.
That must have put a lot of pressure and stress on relationships and.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we had to then reverse role because, I went out. I was a greenkeeper.
Right.
And I'd go greenkeeping again tomorrow. But my back literally, what happened was the L5S1 disc ruptured. About half of it came out. And then it went down the spinal cavity and it calcified onto the spinal cord.
And the doctors didn't pick up on it. Is that what happened?
Oh, well, because it was workers' comp, no doctor really wanted to help me. Like it was all, as soon as I said I hurt me back, because what happened was I'd been a greenkeeper and the side winding roller that you used to sit on at the bowling club, it went over the top of me and the seat hit me in the back. And that ruptured the disc, and then the disc went down the spinal cord, calcified onto the spinal cord. And no doctors, they all thought it was in my head. So, and my employer at the time, the company was great, but the actual boss was, I don't want to say too much.
Yeah.
But he would, all he would say was, there's no such thing as big back payouts anymore. I'm going, I don't want it. Like I tried to work and my right leg was basically dragging about 3 steps behind me.
And you finally got a doctor to properly diagnose it?
Yes, I finally got a doctor in Canberra, and he just did a set of MRIs right there, and he said, the pain's not in your head, it's in your back. He said, the back's what's causing the head. And I went, thank you, somebody.
Yeah, right.
All the doctors would say, oh, no, it's in your head, but it's making your back hurt. None of them really look. So, that was a really, really horrible, horrible world I lived in for quite a while.
It sounds absolutely awful.
It was.
I'm so pleased to hear that you're out of that. All through an invitation to attend a Wiradjuri language lesson. What was the personal interest for you in going to a Wiradjuri language lesson?
I don't know. I really don't know. But there's always been just that something in my life missing, and I could never, ever place what it was. And it wasn't until I heard the Wiradjuri language, I went, that's what's missing. And I thought, wow, this is good. So, jumped in the car and went straight over. And I remember once I was talking to Elder up at Coffs Harbour not long after we started, because there was a group of us teachers and we had a Board of Studies meeting up at Coffs Harbour. And I got up and had a bit of a talk because, there's another thing. I went from not being able to leave the house to start talking in front of people, and just phenomenal what it's done to me.
Yes.
Anyhow, this elder up in Coffs Harbour, he actually said, he listened to what we were doing and he said to us, you've come off your dreaming. You're finding culture and you're awakening your inner spirit.
Yes.
He said, can you just promise me that you'll go ahead and teach as many young Aboriginal kids, Wiradjuri kids, that you can, and get them out of the dreaming that they're in, because they don't get taught any culture whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, like their parents don't know any. So their grandparents know, but they won't teach because they've been brought up that it's a bad thing. So we've got 2 or 3 generations of nobody teaching culture. So, yeah, I made it when I told him what it had done to me, and I could understand what he said was right. It's woken me up inside.
Yeah, right.
So I just endeavoured. I thought, this is it. We're going to try and help as many kids as we can.
So that elder basically gave a frame of reference for what had happened to you. Yeah.
Yes. I had no idea what was happening until he actually said to me, it's just waking up your inner spirit.
Yeah.
And
wise words. What's the history of Wiradjuri in your own family?
Well, it's a bit of a checkered past because my Wiradjuri line goes back to a gentleman by the name of Tom Gordon. He was known by about 4 names. He was Tommy Gordon. He was also known as Tommy Two Hats. He was known as Tommy 2 Feet. And he was known as Tommy Rain. He lived with the Rain family at Boranor. He was called Tommy 2 Feet basically because he walked 2 feet behind the white woman that they basically loved each other. Yeah. And she was from a very, very, Eleanor Wentworth, she was from a very, very prominent family. They were talking about Captain Rain and whatnot. So a very, very prominent Australian family back then. And there's this daughter that disgraced them all and went into the wood, lived in the woodshed with Tommy Rain.
Wow. What a story.
And she then fell pregnant and she had to marry the coach driver at the age of, she was about 18 and she was 6 months pregnant. So, yeah, and that's back in the 1800s. So, yeah, but the poor girl, she died when she was 22. She only had 1 child and she died when she was 22 and she died of inflammation of the brain and she wasn't allowed to come back into the house. She still had to go and die in the woodshed.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So she disgraced the family.
Yeah. And that idea of shame and being shunned continued for many generations past that, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't realise. Well, see, I was quite lucky because I was the only child in my town that was allowed to be brought up in town. My brother and 2 sisters, they were out at what's a little area called Shallarush. And it's just far enough over the hill where you can't see it. And people actually needed what was called a certificate of exemption back then. So if you're Aboriginal, you'd have to actually go into the police station to get a certificate to say you were allowed to be in town. But if you were going into town to get a certificate of exemption, and you didn't have one, you could be thrown into jail. So all along my family line, I've had a woman marry a white person, marry a white person, marry a white person, so they could be in town, and they could learn to live as a white person.
So there you are, wandering across to this little group that Stan Grant's got going in the community hall or something, and you're learning some basic Wiradjuri. Kookaburra sits on the old gum trees, become a bit of a lifeline. You venture beyond the post office and you end up at the school. Tell us the school story.
Well, we still don't know why I went in. I think I had to go and give Angela Fitzpatrick a note from my wife because I think they were playing netball together. I can't remember. No one can remember. I just ended up in this classroom and I went in and seen Ange and I walked back out. She goes, "Oh, Mr. Anderson might know." And I went, "What?" And Mr. Anderson might know how to sing Heads and Shoulders in another language. And I went, "Yeah, I do." and I started to walk out because, you know, I still couldn't look people in the face. I was absolutely nervous as anything. I'd walk around all day and I'd be just like that, you know. I'd be shaking. No self-confidence whatsoever. That had basically been belted out of me, I suppose you could say, by the breakdown. And anyhow, I said, yeah, I do know how to do heads and shoulders in another language. And Ian said, well, come on, show the kids. And I went, all right. So I went, Balangana, bongabo, borami, bongabo, borami, bongabo, borami, Balangana, bongabo, borami, dabirani, bogadi. From there, it just went on and on and on. And Andrew's messaging me and saying the kids want more, the kids want something else. So whatever I was going over learning off Stan, I was coming back and teaching these kindy kids.
The big scary kindy kids.
Eh?
The big scary kindy kids.
Mate, they were mean. They were big, scary kindy kids. And from there, we just sort of went on and on and on. And then the Board of Studies came up to Parks and they said, oh, we want to do a pilot up at the school. Well, we'd already been doing it, the language, for about 3 or 4 months at Parks East. There was no way possible I could have gone into the schools full time with my physical or mental ability, because I was still rather mentally frail back then, still am some days, but if some kid had said something wrong, I would have raced home screaming, you know.
Yeah, right.
Or a teacher's snapped at me, or anyone, you know. If anyone had said something to me wrong, I would have just bolted. So my nephew, he was just moved back to Parks, my late nephew, Ron. And he got hold of the language. I was then started to teach him language. And he becomes so fluent, so good in it, that Bill Cox, who was the principal around at Parks East, said, I want to put Ron on and we'll pay him to do this work. I went, yeah, no worries. So we then had to make our own resources, because then it was just Ron and myself doing the language in schools. Then we had Angela helping us. Then we had a high school come along with Board of Studies, and they were a pilot school. But we were doing it already before the pilot. And then I become somehow, I don't know how, I become president of the ACG, Aboriginal Educational Consultative Group.
Okay.
And so here I was, I couldn't get to the mailbox one day. And next thing you know, I'm in charge of this education group, and that was a big saviour, because then I had all the principals of the schools coming, and we were meeting by ourselves once a month.
Yes.
Oh, once a term, sorry. And I would hit them up and I'd say, listen, how about you start doing language? So, you know, there was all the other schools in town. We got it all up and running. And it was so ironic how people just happened to be in that room looking for a job when I'd asked the school about how about putting language on. It just happened every time, as if a strange force was happening. And I've always said that the elders walk behind you. They guide you, and I like to tell the school kids, I say, you know, when you go to do something wrong, you know it's wrong, and you get that weird feeling that you're not to do it, and they all go, yeah, and I go, well, that's the elders behind you telling you don't do it. And they can understand it, because now we've got about 1,300 kids a week now learning Wiradjuri language and culture.
What percentage of these kids are Wiradjuri kids?
Oh, that I couldn't actually, probably about, of those 1,300, I would say probably about 25%.
25%, yeah.
But we discovered that the more and more we did language and culture, the more and more kids came out, and like they were saying, wow, I wish I was Aboriginal. as you know, when we went to school, mate, what Aboriginal culture was at school in the 70s?
Yeah. Oh, mate, we were buying education kits from the newsagents, and we were looking at men in loincloths with spears, and it wasn't helping us interact with any Aboriginal people that lived nearby. It was just some romantic version of the noble savage from the 1800s.
That's right. Yeah, and like nothing happened before Captain Cook came along and just happened to go, oh, here's a country, and it just. I always tell the kids, it rose up out of the water, and everyone was there, and the fires were there as all the water ran off, and I said, Captain Cook just sort of come along, bumped into it, said, oh, we're going to name it out. This.
Yeah. So this has done a lot to elevate the confidence that the Wiradjuri kids have in themselves. They're happy to identify as being Wiradjuri, and presumably they're going home and they're teaching their parents some of these Wiradjuri words.
Yeah, we found that when we first started, it was quite ironic. A lot of the parents were coming in and saying, oh, can you make sure that, Isabel brings home this week's words? I went, yeah, why? She said, well, we're enjoying them too.
Yeah.
And then the parents would pull me up the street and they say, my kid's in the shower sitting, singing Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree in your language. I'm going, well, no, it's Wiradjuri language. It belongs here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, and that's one of the reasons why I think it works, because the language has been sleeping and we're bringing it back out.
Yeah.
But to see the school kids interact and, because ironically, when we first started, and I thought, how the hell do you teach people? And because I'm not a teacher, I was always kicked out of the classroom for being a class clown.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, when we went to school, you'd sit there and you'd think 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + 4 is 8. Boring. I decided let's have some fun. So being the class clown, I just jumped up in front of the classroom and I just made kids laugh, and they had a great time. And I knew we were onto something when they were going, when are you coming in next, Mr. Anderson? When are you coming in next? So next week. And then Bill Cox, the principal around there at Parks East, he then discovered that the attendances from the Aboriginal kids, the Wiradjuri kids, increased. Because we were able to use the cultural side of it and say, well, if you don't come to school, I'm not going to go to your class and you won't learn. So then next thing you know, we've got kids going right through to high school, and, they felt pride.
Yes.
They were sitting where once before they would have been in a class feeling ostracized. They would have been feeling that little bit less than other people. Now their culture is at the front and they're going, oh, I know that. And you could have a one-on-one with the Wiradjuri kid in class and they'd go, yeah, I know that. Yeah. Say, well, you already knew that. And they'd give a bit of self-pride.
Yeah. So very cool. So all those years of being the class clown has served you well as an entertainer in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, you got to make it fun.
Yeah.
If you don't make it fun, well, what's the point? I'll tell you what, I got this one little story I'll tell you. My nephew and myself were in class one day, and this young student who I went to school with her father, and she said, Dad only said you want to teach this, and so you can take over all our land.
Right.
And I went, you go home and tell your dad I don't want anything to do with his maggoty sheep. And this bloke had prize merinos, so I knew I was going to hit a good note. The kid came back in the next day and she looked at me. She said, I thought, oh, no, this is going to end up really bad. And she said, Dad said this is for you. and she handed me a hand tool. Right at that point, I thought, wow, we've got something here. What are we doing? Because for a farmer to give over a hand tool, that meant that they acknowledged that there was Aboriginal people on their land before them.
Yes.
So anyhow, I got this hand tool and I went, that is really cool. And anyhow, I went like that and I thought, that feels strange. So I put it in my left hand and it's actually a left-handed rock. Somebody, like Bruce Pascoe, very good friend of mine, he looked at it and he said, that's up to about 10,000 years old, that rock. And anyhow, that, the tool. So I went back to the classrooms and I said, can you imagine somebody out there at Billabong or Goobang Creek making a rock for themselves about up to 10,000 years ago, and it's left-handed because that person is left-handed. And, and then you give it to all the kids and you let them pass them around and everything. Mm-hmm. But right then you'll see the kids go, wow, someone left-handed way back then. It's just one of them things. And when I got given that rock, I just thought, yeah, we are on to really something big. And it's just avalanched more and more and more and more and more. So what we do up here in the schools now, we just take it for granted. We get a lot of other schools come up and from other areas and say, how do you do it? How do you do it? Like a few years back, we had linguists from Brazil come over. And they were here for about a month in Australia, and they came to us first. And I said, after that week, I said, well, you can go into the middle of Australia now and you'll see what it's really all about. And I said, you got to, you've done us, we're done for first. And they went, no. So they said, we kept on looking and Googling for Aboriginal language in Australia in schools, and Parkes kept coming up as the top top schools. Mm-hmm. And I went, really? And they went, yeah. So they came in and we explained how we do everything in schools, the little system that we sort of got. And I got into contact with one of the linguists a couple of years ago, and he said they're using the exact same system in Brazil as what we use here to get the mother tongue back into the schools over there. And it's not a hard little program to run. It's just sort of everyone's fallen into place. We'll have people at the schools. Yeah. Right? You've got 5 schools. So we'll have everyone at the school, and just in the middle there, well, that's me. And everyone sort of comes and bounces off me. But then I don't stop them from going to each other. You might have Middleton School needs something that Parkes East can do. And that's how we sort of work. And it's just a system that sort of, we made it. Yes. We made it up and it just works.
Yes. So in a sense, you're that elder behind them, encouraging them and guiding them.
Oh, I don't like the word elder. I get more grey hair every time someone says elder.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful model that you've adopted really there. It's a leadership style where you're leading from behind and you're encouraging.
I mentally, physically, I still can't do like much work, but I can do a lot of outsourcing from home.
Well, it's a beautiful story about how the revival of the Wiradjuri language. Whenever I say that word, I feel like I've had one too many drinks. So I don't know about you, Geoff, but I got to say it doesn't come out quite right. It sounds slurred, but the Wiradjuri language, that's rescued you. Tell us one or two stories about how you've seen language empower people.
I think just being there and mentoring the kids. A lot of the kids may have a bit of a dysfunctional home background, whereas if I'm at the school there and they can walk up and they can have a yarn to me about anything that's happening,
Mm.
that can be a big help to them. But
Yeah.
I've seen young fellas. There's one young fella around here at the Parks East, and he would not do anything until we started doing language. And he went right through school. I don't know where he is now, but he was one of those students that you didn't think was going to end up with much future. And last I heard, I think he was up around the North Coast somewhere. He was a mechanic.
Mm.
When you watch a whole school, the whole persona of a school change, I think that's one of the best things. When we first started, we walk into a school and they wouldn't even have the Aboriginal flag hanging up or flying, or there'd be nothing. And after 12 months, you've got the flag up on the flag post. You've got words in the classroom. You've got teachers saying g'day. You walk into a classroom and you go, Yamandumarang. And then you'd expect the kids to say, Nawa Baladumarang. And that was, are you well? And they go, yes, I am well.
Mm.
And then you'd reply, Yamandumarang, Nawa Baladumarang. Maranana, Nawa Mujimaraba. That is, are you well? Yes, friend, very well. That is good. Yes, friend, very good. And just I always say to the teachers, well, if we can walk in and get that out of the kids, well, we can get rid of all that other stupid stuff like math and science and English, and we'll get on to the important stuff. So, but no, I've watched whole schools change. It's just incredible.
Yeah. And you got white kids saying, I wish I was Aboriginal.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're on a good thing when white kids say that.
Yeah. Well, Geoff, this has been exciting to hear that story, and it's obviously a story that's still being rolled out and told. And I think this moment in history, this revival of the Wiradjuri language and how whole communities have been changed as a result, is going to be a story that's going to be written about for many, many years to come, and hopefully be a model for many other places. Sadly, there are some communities where language has been lost altogether, and it's, we're so thankful that much of the Wiradjuri language had been preserved and had been passed on, and that Stan Grant had been taught that by his grandfather. And, here we are another 50 years later, and you've learnt it and you're passing it on.
Yeah.
And it's just so fantastic. Such a good story.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I'd like to know where we're going to be in the next 20 years, but hopefully we're still going.
Well, mate, thanks so much. Hopefully this podcast will be part of keeping it going and keeping that funding rolling. And all the best for the Rabbits next year, mate.
Monday Gore. Thank you.
Okay.